All right, here it is, part 3 of how to work with or how to create a table view in Xcode. Again, I am working with Xcode 8.3.2 and this is Swift 3.1. So I want to get us started. If you've been following along with the first two videos, there's a couple of things that I want to clean up. We need to do some chores. As it will become very apparent to you as you get further along in coding, you will notice that there are certain things where this is just standard, this is how you do it, and part of the reason that people do things in a certain way is so that everything looks cleaner and easier to work with. So I'm going to come over here to where my files are in my actual project navigator. And we'll come down here and look. We've got Swift files up here. We got Swift files down here. We got some stuff all over the place. You know what? Let's make this nice. And we're going to move all of our Swift files to one spot. And something else you'll notice, hopefully right now you will notice, this is called file.swift. If you make multiple different classes inside different Swift files, you are going to end up with like file.swift, file1.swift, file2.swift. And that would suggest to me that you're the kind of person who, in your Google Drive, you might have 30 files called unnamed document, or on your desktop computer, you might have 40 files that are all Word docs and they're called unnamed document. Whatever you do in the privacy of your own file systems, I will judge you, but um, that's your own business. In here, we're assuming that we might be working on a team, we might be sharing this code with somebody else. For the love of all things holy, unholy, sacred, profane, whatever, do not call your file file.swift. So we're going to go ahead and rename that right now, and we're just going to name it after our class. This is our comic class, so capital C, comic.swift. That's it. That's all we're doing. Special little thing. It makes it nice and clean and easy to do. Okay, or easy to read, excuse me. So now we have a little bit of coding to do. If you were disappointed that we did not actually get anything on the screen at the end of video 2, especially with it being 22 minutes long, that sucks. Okay, so we're going to go back to our comics table view controller. We got a little bit of coding to add here to make sure everything loads up the way it's supposed to. So first off, there's 3 different things that we want to edit to make our table view work properly. First off, we want to edit the number of sections that we have. You see, in a large program, see number of sections, in a large program, or app rather, you might have a number of sections. If you're talking about Facebook, for example, you might run a number of sections on the screen at the same time because there's so much going on. We just want one. And now that one section is going, we can actually get rid of this warning because this warning is no longer true. This warning up here tells you, oh, this is incomplete, it's not doing anything right now. Well, now it is. We changed it to 1. So we're just going to let that go. And then we also want to come to our number of rows in section. There's only one section, and in that one section, we want all of our rows. All right. Well, let's make that happen. I want to return all of the possible rows, and that's really easy to come up with because we have this array up here that we're building from. Our array is called comics dot count. And this is just going to return, which is an integer. Notice, count is an integer. We're just going to return the number of items in our comics array. So if you have an array that's got 75 items, if you've got an array that's got 10 items, if you've got an array that is pulling information from a server and is going to be constantly growing as you start scrolling down, it's going to change the count with the number of items that you pull from a server. Again, going back to an example like Facebook or Instagram. So this is great. This will grow with the size of our program. Okay, here's where we get to a little bit more of a complex part. So this last part is going to take a little bit of time. It's our last bit of code that we really want to get in to make this work in the most basic way. So we want to take a moment and say, in a small app like this one we're building, I'm going to have three comic books. Your app, maybe you're doing food, maybe you're doing the Apple example, which is like a meals app, and your meal app has 10 examples. Something as small as this, you can see most of the stuff on the screen at any given time. And if you can't, like there are so few cells that it wouldn't be unreasonable to make 8, 10 cells and just make all of them so that they're always right there. But we want to focus on you are making an app. An app is going to get released to the public. Presumably, you want this app to have, if you've got a table view, most of the time, if you're, especially if you do anything social with it, it's going to be taking in huge amounts of information, and we do not want to make all possible cells all the time. You're going to bog down the phone or the iPad. You're going to crash. Like you are going to use all of the memory just building those cells. So what we need to do is control which cells are getting created and destroyed at any given time. So we're going to do something called dequeuing. That's not like disqualification. That's taking something out of a queue, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So it's this first. It is this first method right here. And let's get rid of these. So we'll uncomment that entire method. Um, we need to configure this method. Um, this is going to get really noodly. I do not suspect that a new programmer would understand what all of this does. So I'm going to give you the absolute basics of what's going on. So this override function, table view, all of this, we uncommented it, and then we're not really going to do a lot with that right now. Um, so then um, we're going to need to check. We see this reuse identifier. This is actually something that comes up somewhere else in our code. So we're going to go back to our main storyboard, and we want to check the reuse identifier on the cell. So this cell right here. Oh, there's no reuse identifier. We didn't give it one. Oh no, this is awful. This is the worst. It's the end. Okay, it's going to be the same thing as this class, this custom class that we gave. So we're going to name it the same thing as the custom class. So for me, that is comics table view cell. My memory is not that great. I just wrote this down somewhere else. No. Okay, we're back. Comics table view cell. I want it to be exactly the same as my custom class that I created right here. Because then in my code, I'm looking right here. Instead of reuse identifier, I'm actually going to create a constant. So let cell identifier. And this constant is just going to be the same thing, this reuse identifier that's down here. It's going to be the same thing that I just double checked or for the first time put into our storyboard. If you're following along with me, you put it in for the first time. If you are coming to check on this, you might have already done this step. And then we're going to call this comics. Again, this has to match exactly table view cell. If anything is incorrect in here, you will find that it is crashing on you. So then we're going to come down here to the reuse identifier, and we're going to replace this with our constant that we just created. So identifier. Okay. So far so good. And what this part of the code is doing is, all right, so what all this code is doing is this is letting us let us DQ these cells as they leave the screen. So then we're not running all of our cells at one time. Then here we've got this let cell. We're actually going to define this slightly differently. We're going to guard, yep, there's that again, guard let cell. Guard let cell get TableView.dq reusable cell with identifier. Then we're using cell identifier. That's the one that we called before for index path. And then we're going to say as with the question mark. So trying to a comics, where are we at? Table view cell. As a comics table view cell. And then else. And we're going to throw another fatal error, just like we did earlier. Fatal error. And then this fatal error is going to be something along the lines of the DQ'd cell, the decked DQ'd cell is not an instance of comics table view cell. Okay, so all this is saying is it's going to throw a fatal error and let us know, hey, you screwed up because your class types are not matching. All right, so we use this guard let that lets us manage an error in case an error comes in. So we just put a little bit more structure on that. Okay, so stick with me just a little bit further. Now, where it says configure cell, we're actually going to get a little bit more descriptive with that. We're going to say get the appropriate comic to fill in the info for the next row. So then we're going to say create a constant let comic. So whatever comic that we're talking about right now, be comics. So we're selecting a specific comic from our set of comics. That means either comic 1, 2, or 3. Index path dot row. And you can see up here at the start of the function, we have something called index path. So we're using this value to put right there. Then we'll give information about the comic to the cell. So we'll say cell dot comic name. And remember, this is a label, so we have to say dot text is the comic dot name. This is all information that we created earlier. We said that there's something called comic name, and that's a label that has text. We said that there's an object called comic, and that has a name and a cover. So then we'll say cell dot cover preview, which is again an image view. So we need to say dot image because we only want it to be the image part of it that we're talking about. Equals comic dot cover. So now we set this cover image to the image view, and we set the name to the name text, and then that should just about do it for us. We return the cell at the end because this function returns a cell that is getting created. So we should be just about done. Let's build it. Let's see what happens. All right, so our simulator is going to come up. It's going to select our app, build succeeded, and then we're going to get our white splash screen, and then after the splash screen, oh dear God, it's still nothing. Don't panic. there's one step, one minor step that we did not do. We're going to come back to our main storyboard. We're going to select our TableView controller. We're going to come up to our identity inspector. See this class UI TableView controller? We want our custom class comics.TableView controller. And we pull up our simulator and we get our blank splash launch screen, and there's our comics. We've got our comic and we've got our name. We've got our comic and then we've got our name. We've got our comic and we've got our name. Obviously, we need to work on the actual spacing, sizing, label, but that's all secondary. At this point, you have created a table view. And in fact, no, go away. In fact, if we put in 60 different comics on here, this would populate as we scroll down, and it would dequeue as we scroll past items. And that's it. That's the basics of our table view. I will get out a video on how to implement some other objects into the table view. If you're looking at the Apple example, there's like a little star rating bar that we can add to this. We're going to add some navigation so this goes to another page. But this right here is the absolute basics of the table view. All right, there you go.